Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, everyone, for the last talk of the day. I hope you're not exhausted. I will try my best to excite you with 5G and what's this new front door. So I am Altaf, and then I'm a senior researcher at the TU Berlin. And I've been in cellular security for over like 11 years now, and it's quite fascinating to see how generation by generation like security improves, and then a lot of changes in every generation. And are we able to make something better in 5G, or are we going down or something? Like I will definitely like give you a better insight by the end of the talk. Okay, maybe by now, maybe you have some understanding of what are attacks in mobile networks. So you might have seen IMSI catchers, or you might have seen fake base stations, attacks over SS7 diameter networks, which try to exploit the lack of authentication in SS7 networks. Maybe you saw SMS malware or SMS phishing. You saw backdoors that, I mean, nobody knows, but yeah, they are there, unless someone finds it. Then there are API leaks or specifically SIM type of attacks that exploit some browser issues in the SIM. So we have seen like so many attacks over the past maybe 15 years, and calling these like classic attacks. These are basically user targeted, which means they try to target a specific user or a bunch of users, and they try to extract information, or maybe try to intercept the call or SMS, or even track their location, maybe do some type of billing fraud or any other type of fraud, OTT bypass or something like that. So these are like basically user targeted. But 5G is something that is not for, well, I won't say it's not meant for users, but it's more meant for things. So it's more meant for industries like agriculture or automotive, manufacturing, or the critical communications. So there is increased threat when it comes to 5G, and the impact is also quite bigger because here the attacker gets to target the industry and not just a simple user. I mean, of course, users can also be targeted, but I see like there has been a lot of improvement with respect to user privacy or like user security in 5G mobile networks compared to this new door that has come up in 5G, or you can also say the advanced 4G networks as well. Before I go into what is this the new front door, I just want to give a little idea about like how a mobile network looks like. So a simplified mobile network that has a radio network, as you see, which has base stations, and it has devices, handsets or laptops or whatever, like, and they are connected to the core network, and core network has multiple interfaces. I think some of the key ones are SS7 or diameter interface that you see, which connects with neighboring operators from different countries, which allows for roaming. Then there is the data network interface, which allows us to communicate all our apps with the internet. So this is a simple network. But now, for the first time, 4G and 5G networks are trying to bring this network exposure, which opens another interface that is particularly for industries, or let's call like external entities like vertical industries, third parties, or application developers. And I think mobile networks are like widely renowned for being closed doors. So their proprietary interfaces are now changing and slowly moving to generalized or commoditized technologies like APIs, for example. So let's go a bit deeper into what exactly this front door is. So I just expanded the picture a little bit. And you see here that on the left-hand side, you see a smart factory or devices from smart factories or smart homes or hospitals, which are all connected to the radio access network, to the base stations. And then the MNO, the operator, has now control over these devices. And now you see that the network exposure provides northbound APIs to another provider. And this provider can be a virtual operator or another operator themselves, or it could be a platform provider or IoT service provider. I mean, if you just want to have more information about who are these IoT service providers, I mean, it's easy to Google. Like, there are tons of them who provide IoT platforms. So now what this provider does is like he takes these northbound APIs and then generates called service APIs, and then exposes them to vertical industries or to the applications domain, where industries can actually host some of their, not some, but like their IoT devices on the field or infrastructure, and achieve connectivity through the mobile network operator. So now any external entity can actually control their smart devices, by using the service APIs and going through the 4G or 5G core network. So this is a general architecture like how it looks like. To give an example, I took drone because I think everybody is interested in drones kind of stuff. So this is an example from Vodafone's telco as a service model. They were testing in Germany in their 5G mobility lab. So basically, the drone's control center is connected to the network exposure layer provided by Vodafone. So this exposure layer provides APIs and shares information to the drone control center, such as network intelligence, for example, like that actually helps the control center to get the coverage maps, or even sometimes they might also receive anonymized mobile user information, so that if there are heavy crowds in a specific area, they can actually maneuver the drone away from that, fly it in a different area. So by having the drone connected to the mobile network, the control center, cannot lose the contact, even though if it's not having a line of sight. So there are plenty of advantages when it comes to this network exposure. And just to sum it up, I think APIs will be one of the key technologies that will be seen in telecom in the next, let's say, 10 years, I would say. It's changing to clouds, Dockers, virtual machines, so which all require APIs. And then this is just a beginning of APIs in, let's say, in the telco world. If you are confusing the APIs that I'm talking about with some API attacks that happened in the past, there's a big difference here, because the API attacks that happened in the past are those APIs that shouldn't be exposed to the end user and should be hidden from them. But these APIs that I will be talking about, they are something that are particularly created for end users or industries, and they will be open in a secure manner. So there's a huge difference there. Previous ones were a configurations mistake, but this one is a standardized way of exposing core networks, facilities, and data, so that end users can actually benefit. The talk goes like this. So I will explain how do we get commercial access to these IoT platforms, or let's say in general to this network exposure, and what are the features, configurations, then what investigations have we done, and some of the design risks that are really harmful for the networks to come, or for the years to come. Then some of the key findings and disclosure stories, and I will end with some takeaways here. Okay, I expanded the picture before even more, a little bit more, much more, with more granular information. So you see that there is now an IoT SIM card which is added to all these devices. So this IoT SIM is something that is available from the IoT service provider. You call it an MNO or MVNO, virtual operator, so whoever it is. And take a look at this IoT service platform, which is nothing, just to put it easier, it's an API server, which hosts different entities, such as it hosts service APIs, it hosts something called IoT connectivity management platform. And then all this is controllable by APIs from the industries or third parties or application developers. There can be any company, for example. And most of the time, all this entire architecture is usually found in clouds these days. It's getting a common practice, which was not at all some years ago. Okay, now how do we get access to one of these IoT service platforms that we saw? Because that's the one that you need to actually control your devices remotely through the mobile network. So first of all, you have to be a business entity. You cannot be an individual. Unlike, for now, a SIM card that I have, I can buy as an individual. But to buy IoT SIM cards, you should be running a business, and you need a tax ID. So you go to the IoT service provider, you give him the tax ID, your email address, or let's say office business email address, and then office location. And then they will directly ship you the SIM cards that you want. Usually you buy them in bulk, maybe 1,000 or 2,000, it depends. And they come with a different kind of tariff, unlike what we use, because we want it for telephony or other data stuff. But these are IoT SIM cards. They have less data, and then maybe just long lifetime, 10-year lifetime. And they are pretty cheap as well, maybe $1 if you're buying in bulk. Some of the SIM cards that we bought are something that connect to the narrowband IoT networks, a new IoT, low-powered networks. So the provider, once he identifies or checks your tax ID and everything, he will ship the SIM cards to your given location. And then you can host them in the IoT devices. You connect them to the mobile network, and yeah, you can have them remotely controllable So once you get the SIM cards, you also get something called IoT Connectivity Management Platform. It's nothing but a web interface where you can actually see all your SIM cards. You see here like a bunch of SIM cards with IMSI and how much data is available for that, how much is it consumed, the APN. So you can basically control all the settings for the SIM cards directly from this web interface, which is unlike like not really available for a general SIM cards like we use for common day. And with this web application, I mean, you can also create API users, developers, or you can also create an API admin. Then you can activate SIM cards, deactivate SIM cards, buy extra data volume, SMS volume. So you can do plenty of stuff through this web interface. Then second, there is something called IoT Service Platform itself. Something like this, like a Swagger interface, where you have a list of APIs, and they do a lot of functions. First of all, like I think they should authenticate and authorize whenever you want to use the API. Because you're using the API, and then this is going to the service platform, and from there it's going to the core network. So there should be a proper secure access to use them. And the second, once you have access to these APIs, or let's say secure access to these APIs, you can, for example, like go for trigger for location-based services. You can always query the GPS location of your devices. You can integrate your payment systems, voice capabilities, video capabilities. Like you could do plenty of stuff with these APIs. Just to be a bit more specific, for example, like you have so many devices, and then you would like to manage their IP addresses. You could also control that. You could control the roaming policies of the SIM card. You could increase or decrease the data rate, bandwidth, set sleep mode for your low-power devices. Whatever, like you can do plenty of stuff available through these APIs. And being an admin, I think you can also do a bit more, where you can control and read sometimes. So imagine like with this IoT SIM cards, like you could do plenty of stuff, provided like you have access to these APIs. So this is just an example of one of the platforms that we worked with. You see, like you could add a SIM, delete a SIM, update a SIM. You could do plenty of stuff. Just to summarize, so we have the IoT devices that host these IoT SIM cards and connect it to the core network. Now the core network knows exactly where are these devices located, and then it can actually access them. And as an industry, you use the IoT service platform, and then you query the core network with the service APIs, and then extract information about your devices. You can talk to it, you can talk to your devices, you can control them, on them, off them, basically exchange data, video. Like take the case of drone. The smart factory could be a drone as well. Like that's just fitting in this whole network exposure area. Okay, without security, I think it's pretty scary, because through the platform, you see that there is access to the core network. So the 3GPP standard body has actually recommended to use OAuth and then TLS for authentication and then confidentiality. This is, I think, the standard recommended measure. Besides that, I think APIs do generally have rate limiting and logging, monitoring, or firewalls. I think these are like additional features that come with APIs, and maybe when you purchase them. And just to mention, like there are also like guidelines from GSMA. If you are someone who is hosting an IoT service platform, or you should know some of the things that a provider should actually care about while offering a service platform like this to an industry. I want to explain a little bit more how this whole thing is working. So like I said, once you get access to these APIs, you create API users, and then you have an API server where the queries can be sent. So the API server, the API user, first of all, establishes a TLS connection, followed by sending the user credentials, like I think it's pretty HTTP basic authentication, send the username and password, and then get back a token. It's pretty much straightforward, like how you see APIs in the normal IT world. So let's say in this case, you're particularly trying to extract the location of your IoT device. So you send an API request indicating which IMSI of the SIM card, or like which SIM card you want to get information. So you send the IMSI, and then telling that I want the connectivity and its location status. So the response would be that you will receive the exact location of this SIM card, or in general, like IoT device, and to which network it's connected, what are the internal nodes that it's connected. Because you see that this request is now going to the service platform, and from there to the core network. So the amount of information that is sent by the core network to the outside world depends on the kind of service agreement between the platform provider and the MNO. So sometimes like information might be overexposed, so it depends on how the API is implemented. This is some of the screenshots that it in a batch, like if you have like 200 devices, just give me the location of all my 200 devices and then it would get back. I mean, same way, you could do pretty much so many other stuff. For example, send downlink messages, like we can call it like IP messages directly to the device. You indicate the IP address of the device or indicate the IMSI, and you can send a message directly to the was you can create a file and then add your own master key of the SIM card and then push it to the operator. And the operator will actually take care of updating the key in the SIM card and also updating in the authentication center or the main database where all the SIM card keys are stored. So imagine like something like this going wrong. It's basically somebody has an authorization bypass. Would be able to upload whatever nonsense keys can be possible to the authentication center or the main place of the database, which I think is the key of or the heart of the whole telecom systems. Okay, the attack model for this kind of exposure looks like this. So I think first of all, attacker should be on the platform, like should have access to the platform. So he has to have a business relationship with the provider. So basically, he can, if he has a company, like he try to use the tax ID and then register, obtain the SIM cards. So from there, you also get API access credentials to access the platform. Then you have access to the APIs, and then you can pretty much interact with the platform. I mean, in such a case, I think in an ideal situation, the API user should be able to use only, or should be able to talk to only the devices that they belong to them. Should not be able to talk to other devices, not even know if there are other devices. But the goal of the attacker here would be to obtain data of arbitrary users that are hosted on the same platform. Let's say you and I hosted on the same, using the same platform provider, and then as an attacker, like I could just get a contract with the platform and then start probing the API server and see what can I basically get out of it, like depending on the type of vulnerabilities that are there. If possible to compromise the application server, the API server, let's say, it's also possible to penetrate from there into the mobile core network because they are connected. And nobody knows like how they are exactly connected, because this is something still hidden, because it's something between the provider and the operator. You don't know if there is a proper access check before somebody can access a core network. Regarding the skills or privileges that an attacker should have, because this is all dealing with APIs. So standard web knowledge, and don't mention about the number of tools that are available on the internet. There's plenty of them to actually do this kind of attacks. So because APIs are quite new in the telco industry, so some of the questions that pop up in my mind is like, okay, are the standard security mechanisms like what we have seen before, authentication, authorization, confidentiality, are they sufficient? What about like business logic flaws that don't show up unless like you completely test the platform, like, but it's manually intensive. Like I understand that, but what about then firewalls? Like, are they sufficient enough to detect attacks specific to IoT applications? Because this is quite a new field, and I don't think none of the API scanners or the automated testing tools have custom specific attacks towards telco domain, because I haven't seen them. And overall, like there is limited knowledge on what kind of attacks can happen on these platforms. So there is still like a lot of things missing. And imagine like in such a situation, if there is an insecure API, so it's possible to compromise the API server and then get access to the industry or the customer data, and from there access to the IoT devices, or even core network as well. Okay, so we wanted to get our hands dirty and like get into the like doing real stuff. So we contacted like a bunch of platform providers or operators, and then got the SIM cards. This happened during the COVID time, so it was really big hassle because they have to ship the SIM cards to our location. So that took a while. And then we have, now once we have the SIM cards, we have access to the API portal, we have access to the platform, whatever, like we have credentials to connect, authorize, plus we have service APIs to talk to the platform. Just a summary of what kind of security configurations are actually available from the platform. So most of them use HTTP basic authentication for API. Then some of them have follow OAuth for their authorization, or in general, like the whole procedure. But some of them just use a shared token or a static token for each API user you create. So you create, I mean, the point of using static tokens is not really a recommended way. But there are like different choices. I understand maybe the platforms are quite in a beginning stage. It's understandable. But most of them seems to host them on clouds and use TLS for sure to allow someone to actually connect. Okay, so in our analysis, like what are we trying to look here? Like because APIs in telecom is quite new, and then like we also have to have a different mindset when we look at these APIs. So we want to find vulnerabilities in the API configuration. What about like input validation, then business flow, authentication, access control. So all these things we try to consider and then like take a look. Can we find vulnerabilities in them? But we see that there are like hundreds of APIs available for each platform. Like here, there are like 9 platforms that we tried to assess. But there are like hundreds of APIs, and multiplied by 9, there are like thousands of APIs. And all of them provide functionalities like you can send SMS or IP data to the devices. You can get their real-time location. You can update config. So by sending an API request, you can update a configuration in the core network. You can also like control or track billing, charging operations. You can upload master keys to the operator network. So you can do plenty of things. And manually testing them is like really, it's impossible for us. And then we wanted to have a bit of systematic approach. Like, can we do something useful and then see? So basically what we did was like, we tried to select those APIs that have high impact on the business or like the operation and the reputation aspects of the platform. So in that way, we try to see if we could do code injection, execution, or see if we can hijack one of these IoT devices that are connected on these platforms. Or see if we are able to bypass authorization and send SMS to random IoT devices. See billing fraud, the possibility of a billing fraud, because like I said, on the connectivity management platform, we can actually track how much data is actually consumed, how much number of SMS is consumed. So can we tinker with these counters and then erase all the call data records that are present there? Or maybe can we set up APN manipulation? Can we do like custom IP addresses? Can we inject malware in this one? So these are some of the ideas that came up, and then we tried to investigate. I think we have to thank OWASP, because OWASP API Top 10 was quite helpful for us to take a look at these APIs and then understand them. But most of the tools that are commonly available for API research or testing, I think they don't really fit telecom applications. For example, like APIs are nothing but like parameters inside. So when we look at the parameters that are generally used in pen testing or whatever, they don't really fit or match the language inside telco is quite different from outside. So you need like different parameters. So we started to dig out more in the 3GPP specifications or the API design files and extract like some of the essential parameters that we could definitely use, and hoping that we might find a vulnerability in them. Well, of course, we didn't forget the ethical sides of this, because we were like really careful while doing this, so we didn't do anything automatic or like stuff like this. We just tried to be more manual and then like have a good strategy while doing for example, like take the post API request. Like we don't post unnecessary or like random stuff to the API server, because it could create a mess. But I think what we heard from the providers was that like none of our efforts or like whatever analysis we did, they were not aware of it, first of all, and then it really didn't disturb any of the platform operations. So we are okay with that. Okay, now I go a bit more into the design risks that we saw with regards to these IoT service platforms. Probably in terms of access control, authentication, and the amount of data exposure that how they are designed actually. Okay, the first one is the platform design, and Because, like I said, most of these APIs do provide a lot of features and facilities for operators to, for industries to do a lot of operations. My question here is why do platform providers open sensitive functions to even simple demo users? Because there is no point in somebody who is just want to test the platform has access to this key upload functionality. And we also found that you just basically need simple information like a tax ID or email address to register and get access to this platform. That makes it more easier for an attacker to just get access, because first of all, having an access is the key to attack these platforms. And what we saw was there was very relaxed customer verification with many providers. And when we tried to argue this with the providers, we really didn't have a good response. But I think I understand that it's in the beginning of the deployment phase, and they would really like to market their platform and attract as many customers as possible, and they want to showcase their platform as well. So that's something actually bothered us. Then second one was having not enough username and password policies for API authentication. We see a lot of dictionary passwords being accepted, and some of them don't accept during the account creation, but actually accept during a password update. So which is not a good practice, but I think it's important to comply with the best practices in this case. Then token management, like I showed, not all of them follow the OAuth, but some of them have this static API tokens, which are valid from 24 hours to 1 week, which doesn't really make sense because there could be some security sensitive applications or use cases that require token refreshment every 1 hour or even less. So they should be more customizable to different use cases and not just very generic. Then we couldn't really find rate limiting issues, and only 2 of them actually had rate limits in place. And some of them, even though they describe in their documentation, it's not really implemented in their practice. I'm a bit rushing because I see the time is running, but anyway. We see that private identifiers are actually used in apps domain because these are the identifiers that 3GPP always try to hide from the air interface over the mobile networks. But what happens now is in APIs, these identifiers are commonly used, and it's basically exposing these permanent identities in the applications domain, and nobody knows how secure these applications domains can be. So what we recommend is to use a general purpose identifier, which doesn't really link to permanent identifiers. But the problem here is because imagine you and I host on the same platform, it's easy for me to guess your IMSI or ICCID and enumerate based on these identifiers. Having a random identifier, it makes the task for the attacker quite difficult than having something that's easily guessable. So this is an example for that, because what we see when we are enumerating, we see that some of the error messages particularly show that we don't find a particular subscriber for the given IMSI. But on the other side, we see that there is a wrong customer ID given for a particular IMSI. It means that this IMSI actually exists in our platform, but you are not authorized to access it. I think another important thing that with design was whether using firewall or is it by having a secure API by design. Because I think in error messages we could really see what are the firewalls and some of their versions being used. So what we see that when using a firewall approach, some of the parameters suffer injection and some of them don't. But while having a secure API by design, I think most of the parameters, when we do injection or inject a script, they detect and then just avoid or prevent that script from being considered or accepted by the server. We also see a different inconsistent security settings in the whole platform because, like I said, there are 2 things. One, you have service APIs, which are pure APIs. Then you have another customer management portal, which is a web interface. So and both of them share some of the API parameters. And let's say if you fail to inject using APIs, you can actually succeed by injecting over the web interface because both of them share the parameters. And some operators forgot to have a holistic view, complete view on their different applications hosted on the same cloud. So that brings to that there are inconsistent security practices. Malware SMS, yes. I mean, SMS malware is quite a huge topic in telco. But what we tried was like, is it possible to send malware inside SMS to our own IoT devices and see if the platform provider or the mobile network operator detect those malware, or like popular ones that are usually shown on the operator websites, like, but none of them actually prevents spreading this malware. I mean, imagine if there is an authorization bypass. So someone who has an access to the platform can just spread malware across the whole IoT infrastructure that is connected to that particular platform. Not just because, like I said, there is also data overexposure. So we see that some of their SSH ports were actually kept open and was quite easy for us to access them. And I mean, I understand that these are quite in the beginning stages, but I don't see that this is going in a good start. So reducing exposure, I think it's quite an important thing to consider. Now moving on to some of the vulnerabilities that we figured out were like while sending a downlink message, like while actually trying to reach, like I said, in an ideal case, I should be, as a platform, like as an industry, like I should be able to talk to only my IoT devices. But here what happens is like the parameter IP addresses, I think, lacked any kind of validation. So which allows an attacker to inject any random IP address on the platform, or maybe attacker enumerated them, and then just ping all the devices that are present on the platform. So I think in this way, we could actually ping up to 200 devices that are connected to the platform. I mean, there are even more devices, but it's just that you need to change your IP address range and you could still reach other devices. What happens in this case is that, or the impact here is that, because like we saw in the beginning, the data amount is quite limited for these IoT applications. So attacker can easily consume all those resources and then drain, if it's a low power device, also drain the battery for them. So he can basically disable all the sleep modes and then just create a denial of service kind of situation. So authorization, I think it's quite a huge thing when it comes to these APIs. Another quite interesting, funny thing was, I think most of you are aware of something called webhook. So when you create an API, you can also, or like in the platform, like you have a facility to provide a webhook URL, and whenever there's an API action request going on, you get a response also being sent to that particular webhook. So take the case where we were sending an SMS, and then as a response, we want to see that SMS is delivered or SMS is rejected or whatever. So this is the amount of information as an API user I expect. But what we saw was, apart from the SMS delivered information, we also saw the SIM card credentials like PIN, spooks, all the operator codes, then the current location of the SIM card, the HLR ID, the billing information, whatever, like you just name it, it's basically there. And it was sent as an SMS response, which to me is quite surprising because that is not an SMS response for me. But when we tried to convey this to the providers, they said some of the customers like actually needed this kind of feature. Well, I understand, but it has been made generic to all the customers, so which is not the right approach. You should maybe have a customized approach for each of them, and then tune your APIs in such a way that once like somebody's fancy doesn't compromise somebody's security. So it's something that was overlooked, I would say. Like, yeah, this is an example of the response of the API. I mean, I tried my best to hide information, but I really felt bored of just putting the blocks. There is also access control misconfiguration that we saw because there are admin-only functions such as like sending binary messages to the devices or updating APN information, billing information. But we saw that there were discrepancies in what the manual says and what is seen in practice. Like normal API users, like let's say if there's a malicious insider who is not an admin, can really exploit the functionality that's provided over APIs. Then, of course, we have to do APIs means like script injection as well. To me, it came as a surprise because most of, at least 6 of them don't really have protection against code injection. So we try to inject. And I think when it comes to code injection, like you actually need something to trigger that particular code. So, like I said in the beginning, like there were different applications like the customer management portal and then the service APIs. Both of them share common parameters. So what happens is like if you inject over the APIs, like you can actually invoke that on the web interface. Like you need to to execute an XSS payload, you need a web interface. So imagine there is an authorization bypass available in the platform. So attacker can basically inject into parameters of arbitrary users and then let them get them triggered over their customer management portal. So having different applications and then not testing them integratedly, I think it's really a bad practice, and we could really expose that one. So in summary, I think OAuth and TLS are those standard recommended, like are not widely practiced among most providers, and only 2 of them are actually not affected with the vulnerabilities or the design risk that we saw now. And I think attacker can easily compromise IoT platforms, like provided he has given the access, because getting the access is the first key of doing an attack, and that has been made easy. And lack of rate limits and strong password policies are also like an issue here. And another surprise is like script and code injection vulnerabilities. Though many providers did their own testing, internal penetration testing, like how could they actually miss this key vulnerability? SMS and IP content inspection, like I said, spreading malware through these means, it's quite common. Though this is, some providers like said, well, our customers like don't like looking into the SMS and IP data. Also, some countries don't allow by law. But I see like many providers do have this facility of looking into SMS or like filtering them if there is malware spreading in them. But in practice, I really haven't seen that even in 10 providers. But I think I missed that. So the providers, like some of them were from Europe, and maybe a couple of them from the States and one from Asia. So we did, of course, like inform all the affected vendors. One of them really didn't turn back. I don't know why. But I think the good point was like none of our methods, like whatever we tested, like didn't really create any disturbance, and none of them are actually got aware before we actually disclosed them. So maybe one-stop shop security for if you are someone who is into IoT security, IoT service platforms or something, there is, I think, enough documentation from GSMA with regards to security guidelines and how to follow. But I don't think this is the end of it. There is more to be done with respect to API security. I mean, there are like plenty of API security practices and testing that has to be done, I think, to secure all the APIs. Okay, some key takeaways. So definitely 5G is more secure than previous networks, but one thing we have to keep in mind is that from closed gardens, like the telecom industry is shifting to more generalized and commoditized technologies, such as using clouds, APIs, and VMs and Dockers. So there is more increased threat with 5G, and it's not just targeting individuals. It's more targeting like companies, industries. It's like targeting critical infrastructure. Not always the standard security mechanisms won't help. Of course, they are a plus. It's always good to follow the standard procedures, but on top, it's important to have additional security practices that are commonly recommended in the industry. One single API can actually take over the whole IoT infrastructure that is deployed, and firewalls are always not the best. Or like, yes, they do help in certain ways, but you never know like from where is the API vulnerability is popping out. So I think similar to OWASP top 10, API top 10, it's maybe quite nice to have telecom API top 10. Probably it will frame out in some years, and then that will definitely help providers or platform providers like to have, to definitely consider like while developing these APIs. Because APIs this is just the beginning, like it's like the network exposure. So this is something that was designed in the end of 4G. But with 5G, or like Open RAN, if you take, it's full of APIs, and this kind of security attacks will be commonly seen. And I think it's important that take this research seriously, and I think definitely providers or like MNOs can definitely learn from these mistakes and just have security by design as a main principle. And I know it's difficult, but it's the only approach. If you care to install like connect critical infrastructure with 5G networks, I think security by design and proper like rigorous testing is the only approach I recommended, I would say. Yep, that's it with the talk, and then if you have some questions, comments, Yeah, feel free.